I heard my wife say to her boss during the party, "I'll wait for you in the back," and at that moment something inside me cracked. It wasn't just the phrase, it was the intonation, the haste disguised as naturalness, the eyes that avoided mine, the way she concealed her nervousness behind a cheap glass of sparkling wine. The night had been strange for some time, and even without wanting to believe it, I already knew. But knowing, suspecting, and seeing are very different things. Still, I went on. Heavy steps, racing heart, a mixture of anger and fear of being right. When I saw the two of them together, there, in the back of the hall, the hands that knew my face now exploring another body, the voice that told me she loved me now whispering cheap promises to another man, I felt the world crumble beneath my feet. I didn't scream, I didn't cry, I didn't make a scene. I just looked and said, with what little dignity I had left, "You can continue, just don't expect me to come home with you." Shame was etched on her face, but my decision was already made. I left there with the weight of betrayal on my shoulders and my dignity intact. In the days that followed, she tried to find me. Messages, calls, notes left on my doorstep, long, desperate emails that began with, "I was wrong," and ended with, "Please forgive me." But nothing hurt more than the silence. And that's what I chose. Silence. Absence. Emptiness as an answer to someone who made my presence disposable. Her boss, her great lover, showed his true colors as soon as he realized I was gone forever: coldness. Disdain. That adventure that seemed so exciting while it was happening lost its shine when it became reality. And she was left alone. As she always had been, perhaps, but never realized. Alone, she had to face the mirror, the same one where she used to admire herself while getting ready for me, now reflecting what remained: regret, guilt, and the shadow of a choice that cost her everything. Me. I moved on. I tried. Little by little, I relearned how to live without her presence, without the routine, without the morning kisses and the scent on the pillow. It was like unlearning how to walk to relearn how to fly. It hurt. It hurt a lot. But I rebuilt. First for survival. Then, out of deserving it. And then, when I least expected it, I met someone. Someone who looked at me with the eyes she had forgotten to use on me. Someone who didn't need to say, "I love you," to make me feel loved. Who didn't expect perfection, but offered respect. Who listened to my silences with affection and laughed at my stories as if they were new, even if they had already been told before. That's when I realized that I hadn't just lost a woman. I had freed myself from a lie. But the universe has a strange way of reminding us of what we were, what we suffered, and what we could have been. Some time later, when I was already rebuilt, light, walking hand in hand with this new love, she appeared. Not to apologize. Not with a rehearsed speech. But with downcast eyes, held breath, her soul crushed inside. She tried to say something, but there was nothing more to be said. And even so, I offered what was my due: forgiveness. Not to rekindle the relationship, but to close the cycle. So that she would understand, once and for all, that betrayal doesn't just destroy a relationship. It destroys the memory of what was good. It erases the laughter. It empties the memories. And it condemns, forever, the one who betrayed, to live surrounded by shadows of a love that no longer exists. And life, always ready to close cycles relentlessly, delivered the final blow months later. One late afternoon, I was strolling through a park with the person who now filled my life when I heard laughter in the distance. It was a child. Running awkwardly with a flower in hand, stumbling over dry leaves. A common scene. Until I saw the man. He was crouched down, laughing, his arms open, ready to receive that little storm of love. It was me. My most complete reflection. And for the first time, I saw my past watching me. She was there. On the other side of the park. Alone. Her gaze fixed on me. There were no words. No attempts at connection. There was only silence. But now, a different kind of silence. One that carried not questions, but answers. Answers that life had cruelly delivered. She looked at me as one looks at an entire world that has been lost. And I looked at her as one who, finally, understood that one cannot lose what one never fully possessed. The child's smile as she reached me, the woman's eyes beside me shining with joy, and the invisible weight that fell from her shoulders, it all happened in seconds. But it was enough to seal what could never be again. She betrayed me on impulse, perhaps out of neediness, perhaps out of vanity. I'll never know. But what I do know is that, in that moment, looking at her and seeing the silent despair in her eyes, I understood, she lost what many spend their entire lives searching for and never find. She lost someone who, even imperfect, loved her completely. Who looked at her truthfully. Who would never have chosen another person. She lost real love. And the cruelest thing of all, is that now she knows. The cruelest part, is that now she sees it. And even so, she will never be able to touch me again. She will never be looked at the same way again. She will never again hear the sound of my voice calling her name with affection. All that remains for her is a memory, one that will grow heavier with each passing day. With each birthday she spends alone. With each cold morning without a good morning. With each night she wakes from a happy dream and realizes she is in a dark room, with emptiness occupying the side of the bed where there was once love. What happens to someone after losing true love? What remains when a home is traded for an adventure? When the only place where the heart could truly rest is destroyed with one's own hands? Some say everything passes. But not everything passes. Some losses don't become lessons. They become punishment. The curious thing is, I thought the end was the day I saw her with him. I thought the climax of the pain was that moment when I turned my back and said, "Don't expect me to come back." But the real turning point, the true end of our story, happened much later. The day she saw me smiling. The day she realized that, despite everything, I had been reborn. The day she understood, without needing to hear it, that the forgiveness I gave was real, but a return was impossible. She always thought I would be the kind of man who would forgive and take her back. She never imagined I would learn to live without her. And even less that I would learn to love again. To love better. To love freely. But the most unexpected thing of all, is what happens that when she decides to do something that could change everything. Because when pain turns into despair, some people cross lines they should never cross. And it is at this point, that the story truly begins. Welcome to the channel. Here, betrayal will never be romance, all the stories are fictional, but the feelings they evoke are real, because, the moral is clear, betrayal destroys, hurts, and changes lives forever. Our storylines don't romanticize mistakes, they expose truths. So take a deep breath, prepare your heart. You are about to hear a story, shocking, intense, and unforgettable. They met on a timid autumn day, with leaves slowly falling onto the wide sidewalks, when the wind seemed to whisper more than blow. There was something unassuming about that encounter, an almost poetic chance encounter. She was waiting for a taxi in front of the theater after a play they both attended for completely different reasons, he because he was accompanying a friend who had decided not to go at the last minute, she because the show reminded her of her father, who had passed away 2 months earlier. The two of them there, in the same space, without imagining that that moment would define the following years of their lives. When he offered her a ride, she hesitated. But there was something calm in his eyes, a gentle weariness, a peace that contrasted with the anxiety she had been carrying on her shoulders. She accepted. His name was Ethan. A man of serene speech, a civil engineer, methodical without being cold, and with a beautiful habit of always finding meaning in simple things. The way he folded napkins, adjusted his watch, stirred his coffee before drinking, everything seemed like a ritual that transformed the mundane into something intimate. He was the kind of man who remained silent not because he had nothing to say, but because he knew how to listen. She, Julia, was a public relations professional for an interior design company, charismatic, full of life, with a laugh that exploded like fireworks when she allowed herself to be happy. She was observant, a little vain, and with a natural talent for adapting to any environment. Julia had an easy smile, but her eyes always betrayed a certain eagerness to be loved, an old fear of not being enough. They fell in love slowly. Without urgency, without theatrical promises. They built a routine that, little by little, became indispensable. Sundays began to taste like pancakes in bed and late-night TV series. Midday messages became more important than the commitments themselves. And the world, suddenly, began to revolve around small details: her favorite flower that he learned to buy without special occasions, the way she folded his shirt sleeve before dinner, the notes left hidden in the car, the comfortable silences. It wasn't a movie romance, it was an intimacy from a well-written book, where each chapter seemed to make sense, even without major plot twists. The apartment where they moved in together was small, but it had a balcony that Julia loved. She always said that space would be their peaceful haven, and indeed, it was there that they shared their best moments, conversations over wine, important decisions made with their legs intertwined, dreams scattered to the wind like seeds. Ethan, though reserved, opened himself up to the idea of sharing his life with someone. And when he proposed to Julia on a trip to Vermont, amidst the golden autumn leaves, she cried so much she could barely answer. She said yes through tears, laughing and trembling, like someone who finally felt secure in where she was. The wedding was simple and beautiful, surrounded by close friends, family, and a soundtrack of songs that marked their relationship. Ethan seemed calmer than ever that day, and Julia, even with her heart racing, told everyone that she never imagined getting married so peacefully. Their life together settled down with ease. They worked together to furnish their new home, made plans, decided to postpone having children for a while, and enjoyed the freedom of being two adults in love exploring life side by side. He supported her decisions, even when they were impulsive. She admired his stable nature, even when she teased him about his control freak tendencies. They learned to compromise, to negotiate space, moods, and desires. There were arguments, of course, but none greater than the love that united them. Julia's professional career began to grow more intensely. Her company gained visibility, she started dealing with larger events, more influential contacts, invitations to sophisticated receptions, and business trips. Ethan, on the other hand, maintained a more stable, more restrained routine, but never stopped supporting her. Even when tired, he accompanied her to parties. Even though he didn't feel comfortable in that world of polished smiles and rehearsed speeches, he stayed by her side. He never complained, even as he gradually noticed that Julia was beginning to change. She began to take even better care of her appearance, spoke enthusiastically about new projects, and mentioned names that were previously not part of their common vocabulary. Ethan silently noticed the small changes, the extended hours, the last-minute cancelled dinners, the cell phones on silent during the weekend. There was no proof of anything, no clues. There was only intuition, that sixth sense that has no voice but screams from within. And even so, he remained silent. Because he trusted. Because he preferred to believe that the changes came from success and not from something bigger. Because loving also means deceiving yourself when the truth seems to threaten what has been built with so much care. Julia sensed this confidence. And perhaps that's why he sank deeper and deeper into the illusion that everything was under control. He began to separate the worlds without realizing it, Ethan's world, with its predictable tranquility, and the new world, where she was admired, desired, respected for her intelligence and beauty. She didn't realize, or pretended not to realize, that she was drifting away. Ethan, in turn, clung to the details, the way she still left her perfume in the air when she went out, the coffee cup she still washed halfway, the way she said, "See you later," without looking him in the eyes. He resisted the idea that all of that might be slipping away through the cracks of routine. He strove to keep the house alive, to make love endure even in the face of the subtle distance that was growing between them. There was still affection, touches, kisses. But there was no longer any presence. Julia, increasingly absorbed in the new universe she was building, was present in body, but no longer in soul. And Ethan, realizing this, tried to recapture the moments that had been lost. He began to cook more often, relearn songs he used to listen to at the beginning of their relationship, plan short weekends out of town. With each attempt, he received gentle smiles and promises of next time. The love, still there, was no longer enough to fill the silence that was beginning to widen between them. Friends noticed, but avoided commenting. The parents, more distant, had no idea what was happening. And the couple, although emotionally declining, maintained an unwavering social appearance. The photos remained on social media, events were still attended together, dinners were still documented with optimistic captions. It was a subtle, but well-rehearsed kind of lie. The kind of lie that hurts more deeply because it doesn't shout, it only whispers slowly until everything crumbles. Ethan didn't know it, but the breaking point had already been set. A specific date. An important event at her company. An evening that would begin with a toast, smiles, and promises of success. An evening that would end with something being broken, not a glass, not a bottle. But something much harder to fix. As he prepared to accompany her, even tired from an exhausting day at work, she smiled in the mirror with a different gleam in her eyes. And for the first time, he felt real fear. A fear that had no form, but had a taste. A bitter taste that went down his throat as if anticipating the end. And yet, he went. That night hadn't happened yet. But the tension was already in the air. The atmosphere was heavy with something that couldn't be named, but which was perceptible in the details, in the averted glances, the quick embrace, the hurried kiss, the hands that let go prematurely. Their story, built with such care, was about to change forever. But neither of them knew it yet. Or perhaps only one of them did. Because while one still believed, the other had already stopped fighting. That night, the hall was brighter than usual, decorated with sophisticated arrangements and warm lights hanging above the heads of people who laughed loudly, toasted contracts, and celebrated goals. The speeches had ended, the music filled the room with pleasant, modern jazz, and glasses clinked in hands eager for another drink. Julia circulated among the guests with the elegance of someone who knows every face there, laughing briefly, exchanging greetings, and gliding confidently through the groups. Ethan, always discreet, remained on the sidelines, observing the details of the environment and of her. There was something strange in the air. He couldn't tell if it was the way Julia avoided making eye contact for too long, or the fact that she was visibly restless, as if waiting for something. For someone. Her smile no longer seemed the same, and although it still held a sparkle, it was no longer his reflection. He overheard by chance. He was leaving the bathroom, adjusting his shirt sleeve, when her voice pierced the wall of noise from the music and conversations. He recognized the tone, recognized the urgency. The phrase hit him like a punch, "I'll wait for you in the back." The world didn't stop, but for him, it froze. The sound of his own breathing intensified and, for a moment, everything was muffled, as if submerged. He continued, with steps that betrayed his unwillingness to see what he already knew, to confirm what his instinct had been screaming for weeks. He continued, each step heavy as a stone, as if the pain were already tattooed on his skin before he even saw what he needed to see. When he turned the last corner of the outside corridor, he found the two of them. And there was no room for doubt. No space for explanations. She was leaning against the wall, her body slightly inclined forward, his arms around her waist, their faces close, intimacy oozing from every gesture. The boss, who until that moment was just a name among many that Julia casually mentioned, was now flesh and blood, a presence in a moment that could no longer be undone. Time stood still. Ethan didn't say anything immediately. He just looked at them. They moved away when they saw him. She paled as if she had seen a ghost. The other man seemed embarrassed, but maintained his composure. Ethan simply stared at the two for long seconds and said, his voice firm, without raising his tone, but sharp as a razor, "You can continue, just don't expect me to come home with you." The silence that followed was louder than any scream. He turned his back and left, leaving behind not only the party, but a part of himself that would never exist again. On the way to the car, his heart pounded at a rhythm that not even time could slow down. In his chest, the emptiness was so real that it physically hurt. It wasn't just jealousy, it wasn't just the pain of betrayal. It was the loss of what had been, the destruction of what could have been. It was the shattering of everything he believed to be safe. And more than that, it was the end of a story written by two hands, torn apart without warning, without an apology. In the following days, she tried. In every way, she tried. She sent messages, left notes, knocked on the door of his old house repeatedly. He, however, remained silent. Not because he had nothing to say, but because he had already said everything with that last look in the hallway. She begged to talk, wrote long letters, admitted her mistake. She said she had been weak, that it was a phase, that she felt invisible, that she didn't know how to deal with her own ego being fed by another man. But none of these words reached Ethan. None of them could erase the scene he had witnessed with his own eyes. The truth is, when trust is broken, love doesn't disappear, it rots. And he could already smell what was once sweet and now made him nauseous. The boss, in turn, quickly distanced himself. As soon as the situation became real, he made it clear that he didn't intend to maintain anything. She, who had believed that this could be something, found herself alone. Rejected, scarred. She tried to resume her life as it was, but something within her had changed. The looks at work were no longer the same, and the self-confidence that made her shine now trembled in every presentation. Her pride shattered into 1,000 pieces the moment she realized there was no going back, and the weight of loneliness became unbearable when she realized he wouldn't return. Months passed. Ethan withdrew into silence for a long time, tending to his wounds in private. Every object in the house told a story he wasn't yet ready to erase. But, with time, he replaced the memories. He started going out more, reconnecting with friends, rediscovering his own tastes. He redecorated the living room. He donated things that no longer made sense. The scar still stung, but it no longer bled. And on one of those nights, by the gentlest twist of fate, he met someone. A woman with a calm smile and eyes that asked for nothing, only offered presence. A sincere, honest, light presence. She was different. And for that very reason, healing. The new relationship didn't begin with promises, but with respect. Ethan didn't hide his past, didn't conceal his pain. She didn't judge. She only listened and responded with affection. Little by little, without realizing it, he allowed himself to feel again. Julia, however, still lingered like a shadow that refused to disappear. There was regret in every word she could no longer say. Every now and then she would send a message that went unanswered. She knew she was no longer part of his life, but she still persisted, like someone trying to rekindle a flame by heating ashes. And it was then that fate, with its subtle and relentless irony, orchestrated a reunion neither of them expected. A Saturday afternoon, mild sun, a park full of families and couples strolling lazily. Ethan was walking beside his new partner, and between them, a little girl with light brown hair, her daughter, holding a flower picked from the lawn. She ran ahead with open arms, laughing, and Ethan crouched down to greet her, opening his arms in a spontaneous and affectionate gesture. It was at that moment that Julia saw him. She was sitting a few meters away, alone, with a book in her lap that she hadn't read in a long time. Her eyes stopped at that scene and froze. It wasn't jealousy. It was sudden grief. Grief for something that was still alive, but was no longer hers. Grief for a version of herself that died the day she chose to hurt the one who loved her most. Ethan's smile, the child's laughter, the new woman's loving gaze, it was all unbearable to watch because it was everything Julia had thrown away. Everything she had held in her hands and destroyed. She didn't approach. She just watched, her eyes filled with tears, as the man who had once been hers now belonged entirely to another world. A world she didn't belong to. Guilt consumed her. There was no room for justifications. What she saw in that park was more painful than any scolding, any punishment, any moral reprimand. What she saw was the reflection of what she had lost. The true image of the love she had let slip away. There, without needing words, she understood. It wasn't just about betrayal anymore. It was about consequences. It was about life moving on, and not taking her with it. It was about seeing someone who loved you deeply learn to love again, but without you. It was about the true end. Not the one of the fight, the discovery, the scandal. But the end that happens in silence, when there is no more room for return. She staggered out of there, like someone trying to walk after a punch to the stomach. The world kept turning, people laughed, the sun kept shining. But inside her, everything had stopped. And for the first time, she understood what it is to live with the weight of absence. Not of someone who died, but of someone who chose to live without you. That was the real punishment. Not loneliness, not regret. But the certainty that, if she could go back in time, she would do everything differently, and even then, it would be too late. In the months that followed that afternoon in the park, their paths diverged completely. For Ethan, life found a new axis, a new breath. Mornings regained their meaning, and the small rituals, freshly brewed coffee, newspaper on the table, a kiss before leaving for work, began to happen naturally again, now with someone who not only loved him but respected him silently, with complete presence. It was different. There was no need to prove anything, no urgency to impress. It was a light but profound love, built from the shards he collected from himself and transformed into something new. He was no longer the same man, but that didn't mean he was destroyed. On the contrary. There was now a firm serenity within him, a mature gaze, a strength that came not from the pain he had suffered, but from the choice not to be consumed by it. Alongside this new woman, he understood that peace lies not in repeating the past, but in allowing himself to build a new future with someone who doesn't carry the weight of past mistakes. Together, they created honest memories, free from the shadow of deceit. And even when the past tried to creep in the form of fleeting memories or ghosts, he knew exactly where to place it, in the place of lessons. And one of those lessons was clear: never again make room for someone who doesn't know the value of trust. Julia, on the other hand, began to live through a colorless time. Life didn't stop, but it dragged on. The days repeated themselves like cold copies of a flawed version of herself. Work lost its luster, invitations dwindled, messages became rare. The people who once surrounded her always seemed too busy, too distant, as if they sensed that she carried something broken inside that could contaminate any environment. Attempts at reconstruction were like sandcastles, they always crumbled. No matter how many times she tried to reinvent herself, the empty gaze in the mirror reminded her of who she had chosen to be at that decisive moment. On some nights, Julia would wake up breathless, as if she were sinking. And perhaps she was. There was no public scandal, no legal punishment, but there was something worse: her conscience. The clear understanding that she had thrown away something rare, something so many people dream of having and never find. She had it. And she destroyed it. And worse, she destroyed herself in the process. The betrayal, for her, was like a slow poison that now coursed through her veins every day. She tried relationships afterward. She tried to fall in love again. But no man looked at her with the same truth. None of them touched her soul like Ethan did. The problem is that, even if one did, she was no longer the same woman she had been before. And perhaps she wouldn't even be able to receive pure love without tainting it with the weight of guilt. There was one day, in particular, when regret turned to despair. It was a Sunday afternoon. She was walking alone through one of the places she used to visit with Ethan. She wasn't expecting to see him, but fate, in its precise irony, placed him before her once more. He was walking hand in hand with his new companion, his face tranquil, his gaze serene. There was peace in him. Instinctively, she changed course. She wasn't seen. And yet, she was struck. That vision, so common, so simple, destroyed what remained of the hope she stubbornly clung to. There would be no going back. There would be no second chance. There would be no more what-ifs. Only the eternal silence of a wrong choice. Some time later, she mustered the courage and wrote one last message. It wasn't a request anymore. It was a plea for forgiveness. Real. No beating around the bush. No begging. Just acknowledgement. Acknowledgement that she had failed, that she had hurt, that she had destroyed. Ethan read the message. And he replied. Short. Direct. I forgive you. Not so we can get back together. But so you can find peace. I've already found mine. Upon reading that, Julia cried like she had never cried before. Not because she wanted to go back. But because she finally understood that forgiveness didn't bring redemption. It was just a mirror. And in that mirror, she saw everything that was no longer there. Ethan moved on with his life. He remarried in a discreet ceremony, surrounded by a few, but sincere friends. The little girl who used to run through the park became a natural part of his life. She called him Dad with an intimacy that warmed his heart. It wasn't about blood. It was about presence. And he was present. Constant, loving, steadfast. His new wife, by his side, brought not only love, but respect. They didn't need to shout to be heard, they didn't need to promise eternity, they were there, every day, proving to each other that their choice was always renewed. Julia, for her part, decided to move to a different city. Not to escape, but out of exhaustion. She needed to breathe different air, to no longer hear the sounds of the past on every corner. She took only the essentials and a heart emptied of expectations. In her new life, she sought small restarts, a new job, a plant on the windowsill, books she never had time to read. But the emptiness remained. Because starting over is possible, yes. But some restarts come with scars that hurt forever. And so the story came to an end. An end that was neither revenge nor justice. It was simply consequence. The natural consequence of choices that seemed harmless, but opened deep wounds. Her betrayal didn't just destroy a marriage. It destroyed trust, affection, admiration. It destroyed the safe ground upon which true love is built. And this kind of destruction cannot be reversed with regret. It can be forgiven. But never forgotten. If you've made it this far, comment on what you thought of this story. Your opinion is very important. Subscribe to the channel to follow more stories like this, all with a clear purpose, to show the truth behind the mistakes that are so often romanticized. Betrayal is not just a slip-up. It's a deep cut that separates who we were from who we became. It destroys homes, corrupts feelings, and turns promises to dust. This story is fictional, but the feelings it carries are real for thousands of people who live with the consequences of a thoughtless choice. Here on this channel, we don't support any kind of betrayal. What we defend is truth, respect, and love built on honesty. Remember, sometimes there are no second chances. Think before destroying what could one day become the greatest memory of your life.